Hi everyone, and welcome to Generation Justice 2020. We're so glad you could join us for tonight's conversation. Generation Justice started as an opportunity for us to share about ACT's casework, to shed light on issues that exist right here in Dallas, and to help encourage and inspire young professionals to seek change in our city. We're so glad you could join us for tonight's conversation. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank this year's host committee chairs, Allison Williams and Theo Kwong. Given the challenges that we face in reimagining Generation Justice in light of a global pandemic, I want to say with sincere gratitude, thank you for your service and leadership to make this event possible. As a Christian justice organization at ACT, we deeply believe in the importance of everyone living in a safe neighborhood. Because of this, we have spent the last 10 years partnering with brave men and women who want to stand up for change in their communities. In a moment, you will hear from our founder and CEO, Reed Porter. Reed is an attorney, and over a decade ago, he started ACT out of a desire to see justice in pockets of our city that are plagued by crime and violence. Can't wait for you to hear from him, but first we have a video that explains why safety is so important.
ACT exists to make neighborhood safety a normal reality for everyone. But how did we get here? The truth is, the world is full of problems. Many of us struggle to find deep, fulfilling relationships. Others work jobs that don't provide what they need to take care of their loved ones. And many are marginalized and even targeted simply because of the color of their skin. With so much going on and so many issues to tackle, the question that most people ask us is, why worry about safety? In 1943, American psychologist Abraham Maslow published a paper titled A Theory of Human Motivation, where he introduced a revolutionary way of thinking about human growth and flourishing. Maslow stated that humans have 5 different kinds of needs, and he arranged them into a pyramid, with the bottom 2 making up the material needs and the top 3 the psychological needs. According to Maslow, each kind of need must be satisfied before a person can give energy and time to fulfilling the next need. Within the material needs, Maslow described the physiological needs: access to clean water, sustaining food, and proper sleep. Once you have food, water, and rest, you can begin to deal with the next kind of need: safety. These needs include a place to live, job security, and physical health. Only after we have fulfilled this need for safety can we go on to pursue our needs for community, respect, or self-actualization. But what if you are one of thousands of people who live in an unsafe neighborhood where violence and crime make you feel like your material needs are always at risk? And what if you live in a neighborhood that has been historically ignored or underserved, where you can't find help when you need it? Without neighborhood safety, it is hard to get access to healthy foods because grocery stores avoid your area. Toxic stress can put unnecessary strain on marriages, make it harder to be productive at work, and even make people more susceptible to diseases and heart conditions. For kids, living in an unsafe neighborhood can keep them from forming good friendships, focusing during class, or even keep them from imagining what they might do with their life in the future. That is why we care so much about neighborhood safety. ACT equips brave men and women to fight crime in their community using the justice system, allowing them to experience safety on their street. A safe environment allows us to create and use our home, job, school, and relationships to flourish as individuals and as communities. We believe that, having been created in the image of God, all people have dignity and worth. So God asks us to seek justice, especially on behalf of those marginalized and oppressed, giving everyone an opportunity to create the same kind of safe environment we all need to thrive.
Well, thanks, Claire. If this is the first time for you guys to be with us tonight, thank you for joining us. Would love to share with you briefly just a little bit about who we are and what we do. As Claire mentioned, we are a Christian social justice organization. We're made up of lawyers and community advocates that partner and equip residents in high crime, underserved neighborhoods to take back their communities from crime and violence. For generations, pockets of our city have been marginalized by the brokenness of people, policies, institutions, the brokenness of things like our criminal justice system, historical policies of redlining, lack of city infrastructure, and an overall general lack of access and opportunity to so much of what many of us take for granted on a daily basis. It's a brokenness that honestly can be traced back to racism and racist thinking. And one of the major consequences that's happened as a result is that over decades, crime and violence has taken a powerful hold over areas in our city where we serve. Drug houses line city blocks, and the crime that harbors in those drug houses spills out into the streets. Men, women, and children are confronted by all of that crime, by the violence, by the drugs and the prostitution. Families are forced to live like prisoners in their own homes. But that's where ACT gets to step in alongside the communities that we serve. In fact, as Christians, as advocates for community transformation, we are motivated by our Christian calling to love our neighbor as Christ loved the church. And we are his agents of change and transformation as we have the opportunity to bring healing both physically and spiritually to these communities, to these pockets of the city. We do this through providing justice and caring for these brave, courageous men and women by providing resources that enable them to shut down the drug houses on their streets. For almost 12 years now, we've been carrying out a vision to make neighborhood safety a new normal, a new reality for everyone, no matter where you live. And we're not just an organization that likes to push our way in to bring change. We actually believe that the solution lies within the neighborhoods themselves, the residents. So tonight, we're excited to have a conversation with you about three things. First, we're excited to talk about the role of police in the community. We're excited to talk about the opportunity that we have to think through equitable justice reform and the collective opportunity we all have to create a more just, equitable society. But this is a big vision that's going to take a lot of change. In fact, historical inequities, past injustices are going to have to look different. So tonight we're excited to have a conversation with you about the role of police in the community, equitable justice reform, and the collective opportunity we all have to bring about a more just and equitable society. But it's a big vision, and one that can't change unless we deal with past inequities and historical injustices that have plagued our city. With that, I want to introduce you to Kelsey Salufo. She's a lawyer on our team and one of our field directors who's going to be moderating tonight's panel. Thank you again for joining us. We're excited to have you with us.
Good evening. I am so excited to be here tonight and to get to help to facilitate this conversation. You know, at ACT, we often find ourselves at the intersection of police and community. I'm a field director and I spend day in and day out with community members in Southern Dallas, primarily in communities of color. And we are working together to address drug houses, other crime issues, to build safer, healthier communities. And a big part of our work as we are building the cases against drug houses on the civil side is working with police officers as they're addressing different issues in the public safety system on the criminal side of the justice system. And so creating space for greater communication between community members and between police is a very central part of our work. There has always been tension at this intersection, but I've never felt the tension as palpably as I do now. It is almost electric. I'll hear from community members who don't want to call police. They fear police brutality. I hear from community members then who are feeling increasingly angry, feeling like their neighborhoods are actually under-policed. They feel like this level of crime wouldn't be allowed to exist in another community, in a primarily white community. And then I hear from police officers, and they're expressing frustration too, because they are feeling a lack of support from the communities where they're serving. They're feeling almost whiplash from the number of demands placed on them. And none of this tension is new, but it's just different. It's more intense. It's heightened. I'm excited because tonight we have two panelists with us who have a really unique perspective on this tension. And I'm excited about our conversation, and to introduce them to you. We have Major Vincent Weddington with us. Major Weddington is a major with Dallas Police Department, but he has been with DPD for 28 years. He's assigned to the Southwestern Patrol Division. We also have Ulysses Reeves Waters here. And Ulysses is an attorney as well. She is a deputy director at Lone Star Justice Alliance, and has also been an assistant city attorney and prosecutor in the community courts with the city of Dallas. I actually had the opportunity to work closely with both Ulysses and Major Weddington when I was an assistant city attorney and community prosecutor. And over the years, they have both shared with me a depth of perspective that has helped to grow me and has helped to grow my understanding of policing and of race equity issues in Dallas. And so we are so grateful to have you both here tonight, Ulysses, Major Weddington. I could go on and on about your education and your experience and your expertise. We have very little time tonight, so I'm going to encourage our listeners to read their bios, look them up, read about them, learn about them and from them, and that way we can just sort of jump into this conversation tonight. I want to start with a question to Major Weddington. Major Weddington, so you and I have known each other for a long time, and yet somehow I only just learned the story of why you became police. Can you tell? I thought that was a great place to start. So tell us, why policing for you?
Certainly. It was in the spring of 1982. I was in college at the University of Pittsburgh. I had gone downtown to go shopping, and I was waiting at the bus stop to go back to campus. As I was waiting at the bus stop, a Pittsburgh police paddy wagon pulled up. Officers jumped out, grabbed me, handcuffed me, threw me in the back of the paddy wagon, didn't tell me what was going on. I was 18, 19 years old. I was terrified. And as they went on their route, they were grabbing other people, basically black males, handcuffing them and throwing them in the back of the paddy wagon. After about 30 minutes, they stopped the paddy wagon. They started going through everybody's pockets. And they found my University of Pittsburgh identification card. And they said, "Why didn't you tell us you were a student at Pitt?" I said, "Nobody asked me that question." They then unhandcuffed me, dropped me off in a neighborhood I was unfamiliar with. And at that moment, I said, I'm going to be a police officer because I don't want what just happened to me to happen to anybody else. And I made it my mission. When I was in the Dallas Police Academy, they used to ask us, what department within the police department do you want to work? What unit? And I used to say, I want to work in internal affairs. And everybody used to laugh at me and point fingers and say, he wants to be an internal affairs detective. Nobody ever comes through the academy and says that. They say narcotics, SWAT, vice, homicide, and I said internal affairs. I said, because I want to make sure that I get the crooked officers off the streets and off the department. So a vast majority of my career has been in internal affairs and in public integrity, where we investigate officers who have committed criminal acts also.
Major, that story is so compelling and moving to me, and I really appreciated getting to hear about that, and I'm grateful you just shared it with us because, for some of us, this conversation about police misconduct, excessive force by police, particularly against communities of color, feels like a newer conversation, but it's really not. But it's taking on at this moment just a real urgency in our national conversation. And you describing this instinct tracing all the way back to when you were a young man. I guess my follow-up question to that, from that experience and your years on the police force, is really the root cause question, to say, you know, what's at the root of excessive force used by police, and how does race play into it?
I think some of the root causes are fear, number one, fear of the people that you are sworn to serve and protect, your exposure to different communities, or lack of exposure to different communities, also plays a role in how you respond to a perceived threat. And the use of force in some kind of ways is ingrained in the officer, the excessive use of force in the officer. Studies have shown that the same officer with a different stimulus, a different race of subject doing the exact same thing, will use different levels of force depending on what the subject looks like that he's faced in front of. So there are a myriad of reasons as to why excessive use of force, you're seeing a lot of that now, and not the least of which is a lot of the young guys today have never been in a fight. They've never had a physical confrontation before. So they go straight to their tool belt, tasers, mace, gun, because they don't have a lot of physical attributes to defend themselves by using your hands. And we saw that played out in Atlanta, where the one suspect was able to outmaneuver two officers that actually had him on the ground because they lacked physical skills to subdue the subject with their hands. So there are a lot of factors that go into what we're seeing now with this excessive use of force.
You mentioned you mentioned one of those factors being fear, and I know you told me a story about a sergeant who was sort of instrumental in your life, and a story about how fear and going into a situation that would cause most of us fear, how that played out. And was wondering if you could share that, because I thought it shed a lot of light on sort of that real-time experience that the officer has.
It was absolutely extremely profound. When I was in the Dallas Police Academy, he was a sergeant at that time. He had been shot in the back and he was paralyzed as a result of a call he went on. And he shared his experience with us. He answered a call about a burglary at a school here in Dallas, in Northeast Dallas. And when he arrived at the location, there were two juveniles behind the school, and the two juveniles were Anglo, and the sergeant was too. And he told our academy class that the reason he's in this wheelchair right now is because he did not look at those two kids behind that school as a threat to him, because they reminded him of his sons. And he told us that if they had not been white, if they had been a different race, he would have exercised the precautions that he needed to have. And it was profound on two fronts, because number one, he assumed something that was wrong about the two kids that were back there. And number two, he told me and he told the class how he perceived other people also. So it was really two-pronged. He assumes the wrong thing about the kids behind the school, and he also assumes the wrong thing about other people most of the time. So it was extremely profound, but he told us, I'm in a wheelchair for the rest of my life because I made the wrong assumption on the people that look like me.
Such a, like you said, a profound story that shows the impacts of these split moment decisions. Turning to you, Ulysse, you come with a number of different perspectives as well. You've been on the prosecution side. You now work with young men and women who have been charged with offenses. You're deeply involved in your church in South Dallas, where your husband pastors. And so I just kind of want to pose to you the same question, but maybe a little bit differently. First, just to ask you, is excessive force used by police, does that disproportionately affect people of color? And if so, why?
Yeah, thank you so much again to ACT and to you, Kelsey, for allowing me to be here to share with you guys tonight, and hopefully to provide some insight from my perspectives. And the reality is that there's been lots of research done on this subject of police brutality and use of force. And the reality is that the data bears it out. I mean, African Americans, Black folks, men are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than whites. And that is an astounding statistic. But then when you consider the fact that they're 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed compared to white people, that's an even more alarming statistic, right? So you have, African Americans being killed 3 times more likely to be killed, 3 times more likely than whites, and 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed. And I think that comes to bear from the Major's story. And, I wholeheartedly agree with him with regards to the fear. And when you start to think about why is fear so impactful, you have to ask the question, where did this fear originate? Where do we as a society begin to fear people of color more than we do white people? And I'll have to tell you, in my race equity work, in the civil rights work that we've done, my husband and I, we are able to trace back that fear largely to the dissemination of Birth of a Nation. And if anyone has seen that movie, it's the movie that was produced after Reconstruction, after the slaves were freed and were able to build their own facilities and to till their own land and develop wealth on their own. This movie came out that really depicted Black males as a brute, someone to be feared and to protect, particularly the virtue of white women. And the alarming fact about Birth of a Nation is that it was first viewed and aired in the White House. And from that, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan escalated. And since that time, there has just always been a depiction of people of color in a fearful manner in terms of being a threat. And I just think that it's one of the things that, like the Major said, it's one of the biggest challenges that we face as a community, largely because if you look at the incidences of mass violence, the mass violence is being committed by white males. So if you think about Patrick Crusius, who drove 11 hours from Allen, Texas down to El Paso to kill Latinos who were shopping for school supplies just 1 year ago. Down in El Paso. If you look at Dylan Roof, who walked into a church and actually had Bible study with the church group and killed 9 people. And it's very surprising to me, or interesting to me, that this young man who had just murdered 9 people in a church was able to be apprehended without any issue by police officers. And there are countless stories over and over again. I mean, even just the most recent incident where the young man, and I've forgotten his name, who was carrying a large rifle gun and shot folks who were protesting, right? I mean, it is very astounding the ways in which force is used against people of color as opposed to white people who actually are legitimate threats. And going back to the Major's statement, this bias, unfortunately, keeps us all from being safe because we are overly criminalizing people who are not violent, and we are under criminalizing people who actually are violent. So we're missing the signs that indicate that there is behavior that needs to be addressed.
Ulysses, I'm struck that the questions that you're asking back to me to explore what's the root cause of the fear that leads to over-criminalizing, those questions are really pointing to more of systemic issues, more of systemic racism, and something that really goes into a much broader conversation than just excessive force by police. And so I guess that that leads me to want to ask you all, and I'll start with the Major on this one, but kind of talking about systemic funding. So usually budget time comes around, and we think of law enforcement needs as being the essential needs. Those are not going to be the ones cut from the budget. But now we're hearing words like defunding the police or dismantling the police. We're talking about systemic dollars. So Major, can you educate us? I mean, what do these terms mean? How did we get to this place?
Well, I think what happens is people are looking at the budget, for example, in Dallas, where the single biggest line item budget in the city's budget is public safety. The police department's budget accounts for almost 70% of the entire budget of the city of Dallas. So what the citizens are saying is surely there must be some pork or fat in that budget. We can trim some of that off and use some of that money for other things that could possibly lead to lower crime rates. Investments in some economically depressed areas, taking some of the burden off the police department, like dealing with things that are non-criminal matters, and freeing up some of that money for other things. It does not, and it does not mean doing away with the police department. It does not mean downsizing the police department. It does not mean making sure that your police department has equipment that's needed so they can do their job. It means looking at the budget as a whole and say, where can we cut some things from this budget so that we can have the police focusing on the things that they were intended to focus on in the first place, and redirecting their efforts.
So, okay, so a difference between defunding and dismantling is what I'm hearing. Defunding being
Correct.
to reallocate some dollars, and you mentioned, and dismantling meaning to eliminate police. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. And I haven't heard any clear thinking individual say we want to dismantle the police department. They want to repurpose the police department. They want to refocus the police department. But I haven't heard anyone say with any seriousness we want to do away with the police department. So I think when you listen to these conversations, the real crux of it is police departments in most cities across the United States have the single largest line item in the city budget. And citizens who fund these cities are saying, wait a minute, we are the taxpayers. We have the right to adjust, set these budgets to our liking. And that's what they're doing. That's well within their rights to do that as the taxpayer. They can say, no, we don't want to spend $600 million of the taxpayer money on the police department. We're only going to spend $550 million, and the other $50 million will cut, and we'll use that money for something else. That is well within their right to do that as a taxpayer.
Well, so Major, you mentioned, kind of as you were describing defunding, this idea of allowing police to get back to doing criminal work. And you mentioned non-criminal items being part of that conversation. So talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, are police, what kind of roles are police taking on? Are they taking on roles that they shouldn't be taking on? Talk to us a little bit about how you see that.
Absolutely. They're taking on, actually, the vast majority of their day is spent on things that are non-criminal in nature. Mental illness calls. Currently, 25% of the arrests that are made here in Dallas in any given day, month, or even for the year are for mental illness. We call APAL, a lunacy arrest. 25% of all the arrests that are made are for that. So that in and of itself, I can understand a call regarding an individual that may be mentally ill if he's carrying a weapon. Mm-hmm. If he's walking down the street talking to himself and he has a machete in his hand, that's a police matter. But if he's just standing on the street corner talking to himself, that's not a crime. So the police have been dispatched on thousands and thousands of those calls in Dallas. We get dispatched from loose dogs. When the lady was mauled to death in South Dallas, they made that a police problem, not an animal control problem. We get called out on suspicious persons calls. that are not criminal in nature. Again, if there's a man walking down your street with a mask over his face, with a machete dripping with blood, that's a reason to call the police. But a man pushing a grocery cart down your street because he doesn't look like he lives in your neighborhood, that's not something the police should be responding to, because no crime, you can't articulate a crime that's been committed. We get caught out on runaways. That's a family matter.
So
That's not a
Major,
crime.
the idea being that I guess with defunding, to take some of those dollars, say that are going to that 25% of calls that are mental health issues, take some of those dollars, reallocate them to mental health professionals or people who are equipped in some other way to be dealing with those issues.
Absolutely.
Good idea, bad idea? What do you think?
Excellent. That way the police department can focus on what it was intended to focus on, which is law enforcement.
Ulysses, I would love to hear you sort of weighing in on this conversation. Anything to add?
Just to say I agree. Kudos to the Major. Yes, that is absolutely correct. When we, and Kelsey, when our time of being, at the city attorney's office, and we would often office with police officers and hear the stories about the various calls that they have to go on. I'll tell you, I even had, one of our lieutenants to say to me, hey, can you figure out a program so that we can refer neighbors to some sort of mediation service? Because the number of calls that we have to take just to resolve neighbor disputes, which are not a criminal matter, they're a civil matter. And the unfortunate problem is that we go out to the call, we can't do anything really. And then what ultimately happens is that the issue never gets resolved or addressed. And then it turns out to be a criminal matter because somebody has taken matters into their own hands and taken some sort of violent act. And I think that that's the thing that we need to focus on with regards to our public safety. Really, as we do with Lone Star Justice Alliance, we take an approach to public safety, understanding that really public safety is an issue of public health. When we start to address the health needs of our community members and of our neighbors, that's when we really start to drive down into some of those factors that drive crime. And I think that to ask police officers to bear the burden of answering both criminal issues and social issues is it's entirely too much of a burden to bear. And quite frankly, from the officers that I've had relationships with and I've talked to, but many of them are actually in agreement with the idea of reallocating resources and honestly just getting some help. Like I've talked to the Major, and when you're at the police academy, you're not learning the intricate skills necessary to deal with folks who have severe mental health issues. I mean, there are nuanced responses to behaviors that mentally ill people, that folks who are trained in dealing with mentally ill people know, such that they have an understanding or of awareness of whether or not I am really in physical danger, or is this just the behavior of this person who has bipolar disorder or who is schizophrenic. And I think that as a community, it would do us all well to make sure that we are allocating resources to those who specialize in these very unique and specialized areas of social response.
And yet, Ulysses, and you've probably had the same experience, right? We're talking about allocation of resources, right? Myriad of public health issues. But in my experience, talking with folks may fear police brutality, but I've never heard anyone say, I want less police in my neighborhood. In fact, I kind of alluded to that tension earlier, this tension of folks expressing that they feel both over-policed and under-policed. Have you had that experience, and what's behind that tension if you've experienced it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the experience, it's, honestly, and so if anyone has heard our DA talk publicly about policing in Dallas, you've heard him say that there's two different kinds of policing that happens. There's policing that happens in impoverished communities and communities of color, and then there's policing that happens in more affluent communities. And just quite frankly, living in South Dallas, I've experienced the same, where, you know, you can easily be pulled over for a tail light. You could easily be pulled over for no turn signal. You could easily be pulled over for just, you know, having a front headlight out and looking like, you know, there's something wrong. And really, you're doing nothing but just going home. But then I've also been on the other side of it where, you know, we've had to call the police because there was, you know, an incident that happened, and it was 4, 5, 6 hours later before anybody showed up, you know? And so it's the issue of feeling militarized in your community, but then when you are the one who needs the public safety attention, it seems like the call never gets answered. And so a reallocation of resources, and quite frankly, a kind of reorientation of how we perceive communities of color and how we perceive crime is really what's necessary to make sure that all of our citizens in Dallas feel as if, you know, the police officers or the police force is working for them.
Major, any thoughts on that same question? Any response to folks who express this almost seeming paradox? We're under policed, we're over policed, both at the same time. It's the solution.
Certainly, we hear that all the time. And I've always said what the community is saying there is we want quality policing. They don't want to be pulled over because their headlight is out, or they don't have a you know, the light over the license plate wasn't shining bright enough. They also don't want the police to abandon the community. They want what everybody else wants. I want quality policing in my community. I want a servant who is out there serving the greater good of the community. They don't want a occupying army in their community. So what generally happens is when a crime is committed in community A, and if community A is an impoverished, low-income minority community, the police address that crime totally differently than they do in an affluent community. And I'll give you an example of over-policing. Let's say there's a shooting at an apartment complex. 2 people are killed. You hear this all the time in the police department. We're going to go out there, we're going to have zero tolerance at the apartment complex. We're going to stop every car that comes in and out of the complex. So what the people in the community say, they say, we didn't shoot those people that you saw in the car. We had nothing to do with that. Why are you treating us like we're criminals? I'll tell you what they don't do in affluent communities. They don't do the same thing up there. They have a precision, intelligent response to crime in communities that have wealth and influence. In other communities, they do exactly, because I've been on the department for 28 years. I see it all the time. We're going to go out here and we're going to have zero tolerance. We're going to stop every single person walking. We're going to stop every single car coming and going. And I always ask the question, are you trying to catch the people who did the shooting, or are you just out here putting your knee on the neck of the community? Because doing that doesn't help solve the double homicide. It doesn't engender you to the community at all. Because they want the people that shot the 2 people in the car also.
Major, I'm gonna jump in here because you're pointing to really issues of disparate policing, and you mentioned that, you know, kind of comparing that to quality policing. We only have a few minutes left, but is there room for police reform to get us to that quality policing?
Absolutely. We're going to have to do better mental health checks on officers. We're going to have to do physical fitness checks. We're going to have to do away with qualified immunity. There's a laundry list of reforms. We're going to have to up the educational requirement of people in the police department. Everybody needs to have a college degree to be a police. Actually, right now in the state of Texas, it takes more hours to be a beautician than it does to be a police officer. So we're going to have to raise the standards across the board. And when we have more time, we can talk about our laundry list of reforms that need to come about. But until we change the reforms, we're going to get the same result over and over again.
Ulysses, we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to leave a couple of minutes for you to sort of talk to to our audience about some of the ways that we can get involved. But just before I turn to that, anything that you want to add on the idea of police reform and some of these items that the majors mentioned?
Absolutely. Just want to agree with the major. One of the pieces that I have been a huge proponent of is restrictive policies with regards to mental health for police officers. As I began to delve more into mental health and behavioral health as we do the work that we do in the Second Chance Community Improvement Program, I understand the ways in which trauma impacts the amygdala and how it limits the executive function of the brain. And so when you start to think about the plight of police officers and how infrequently officers are provided the mental health support that they need, we're asking folks who have literally seen people get shot. They've literally seen, and I hate to be so graphic, but it is the life of a police officer. They've seen people's brains splattered all over the highway from a car accident. I was talking to one of the deputy chiefs in DPD about this very issue. And he said, well, you do know that for police officers, when we arrive to the scene, and we're usually the first ones to arrive to those kinds of scenes, that we leave from that scene and go to the next call. But the EMS group who responded to the call gets off of rotation for 2 weeks to try to process and deal with what they had just seen. And so one of the things that I think is critically important is not just saying, hey, police officers, you have access to mental health care or to mental health services, but requiring it as a matter of policy for routine checks to make sure that folks are okay. Because the reality is that I want, just as much as I want the folks in the SCIP program to be mentally well, I want those folks who are heavily armed, responding to my call or to anyone else's call, to be mentally well as well. And so I fully agree with the major, and I think the more that we take that seriously, the better off we will be as a community.
Such a great point, Ulysses, and such a great reminder, really, to stop and to consider just the weight of what an officer is going through. This conversation, we could go on all night. We've barely touched the surface of it, but I've so appreciated our time together. We have a generation of listeners tonight who are excited to become part of a more equitable society. They want a more just society. They want safer communities. Major, let's start with you since we started with you, and we'll end with you, Lise, since we went to her next. So, Major, do you have any charge for our listeners tonight?
For the young listeners, I want them to stay engaged. They need to be involved politically. They need to be involved socially. If they want to change things on their police departments, I encourage them to go ride with an officer in our ride-along program so they can see both sides of the equation and make an objective decision on what changes need to be made. Get with your council person, get involved with grassroots organizations, and you certainly have the power. Remember, the police work for you, not the other way around. You are my supervisor. If you pay taxes, you're my supervisor. I merely do your bidding. And I think they need to understand that. And when they understand that, effective change will come about.
Thanks, Major. Thanks for being with us. Ulysses, any thoughts for our listeners?
One of the things that as I started doing this work, and actually when we started out in community prosecution, and I really began to be deeply involved with the community, and particularly the young people that we engage in the Second Chance Community Improvement Program, I began to really see beyond just the stereotypes and the information that I typically would receive from the media. And as I walked through that process, and one of the very first times that I heard Bryan Stevenson speak, he mentioned this concept that has stuck with me and has resonated with many people, is that in order to really effectuate change, we have to be proximate. to the folks who are engaged in the struggle, who are engaged in the disenfranchisement, who are being marginalized, to understand their experience and not simply to stand as a third-party observer, assessing on our own what we believe are the ills of that community or of those people. And once we get proximate to the issues, then we begin to see a whole new perspective of the plight of folks who are not like us or who don't come from our community. And so I would charge anyone who's listening tonight that if you, if there are perceptions of various communities and people that you've heard, get proximate. Find somebody from that community and spend some time with them, ask them questions, see their lives. The other piece that I have is that, and it's my closing statement in the TEDx SMU talk that I did back in March, called Can You Hear Me Now? Which is the reality that we are all human beings and that all human life is valuable. So whether it is as Major mentioned, the man pushing the basket, the empty basket on the street, or the gentleman who's standing at the bus stop talking to himself, remember that person was a baby at some point and was birthed to some family, and that there is value in that person's life, regardless of how different they are from you, regardless of how different their demeanor or behavior is. There is value in that human life. And if we all just operate with that mindset and approach our neighbors in such a way, I know that I'm here with ACT and we are people of faith generally that are attending. If we are to love our neighbors as ourselves, how much love are we really showing to our neighbors? And I think that that's one of the things that we really have to ask. That's one of the questions that we really have to ask ourselves, to make sure that we are leaving for those who come behind us a better society, a better community. And the final thing that I'll share is that, unfortunately, because of the racial inequities, because of segregation, and how separated and siloed we are as communities, it is very easily to look at someone who's not in my community as the other. And anytime we otherize people, we dilute our power as a community to not only address the social issues that we're facing, but also to come up with some extremely innovative, creative ways to make our community, to make this truly a greater Dallas. And so I would just ask everyone to take those perceptions, take those perspectives to heart, and let's make this a better community, not only for ourselves, but for those who are coming behind us.
Thank you, Ulysses, so much. Major Weddington, Ulysses, Waters, we are so grateful to you both for having been here tonight and for getting to start to explore this conversation with you. And we've got so much more to explore.
Thank you so much again for being with us tonight for our topic of justice reform as it relates to an equitable society. Obviously, the conversation that you just listened to is much larger than can be fully captured in 30 or 40 minutes. So to that end, I would encourage you to continue pursuing knowledge along this line of justice reform and how you might contribute to an equitable society here in our city. So, my suggestion, pray for those leaders in our city who are making decisions. Pray for our policemen, pray for our neighborhood leaders, support local nonprofits. It is the season of North Texas Giving Day. And then get involved, roll up your sleeves and get involved with the neighborhood association or with a local organization that's working in one of these neighborhoods. I'd also like to extend a great thank you to our corporate partners who have come around Generation Justice this year to make this conversation happen. I would also like for you to hear directly from them tonight why justice matters to them and why they've rallied around this event, Generation Justice.
I'm Hillary.
And I'm Jason. We're with Rising Phoenix Real Estate.
And we're excited to be this year's title sponsor for tonight's Generation Justice.
So for us at Rising Phoenix, this partnership made a lot of sense. We're active in a lot of the same neighborhoods, providing home ownership, which we think is extremely important for folks, where ACT is kind of coming at it from a different angle and empowering neighbors to stand up for their neighborhoods by kind of ridding those neighborhoods of drugs and crime and whatnot. So it just seemed like a good synergy between us and ACT, kind of coming in and improving neighborhoods in two different manners. And so happy to be on board here.
TBK Bank could not be more excited to be a 2020 ACT event sponsor. At TBK Bank, we believe our purpose is to help people triumph by creating opportunities for success within the communities we serve. We believe that a viable and safe community is foundational to that success. That's why we're proud to stand with ACT as they help empower our neighbors to fight crime on the streets where they live and replace it with dignity and hope.
Hey, I am Ricardo from Broadcat. We are a legal design company in Dallas, and this is our third year of being involved with Generation Justice. We support this because in the legal profession, we tend to be really good at addressing immediately felt needs, but not so good at addressing root causes. And when we do, it can be in this really abstract way where we focus on issues instead of people. So what we love about ACT is this model that targets those really deep issues in a really relational way for this long-term impact. It's really important work, and it's work that we're thrilled to be able to support.
Hello, my name is David Denton. I'm a partner at Brown Fox. Brown Fox works with ACT because at our core, we are both here to advocate for people who need our help. As lawyers, we can stand before the courts of Dallas County, stand before the judges, and shine the light on the issues that are faced by the folks in South Dallas and West Dallas, the problems that they face in their community that need to be addressed to make their communities a better place. Brown Fox prides itself on serving others and seeking justice. We are grateful for the opportunities that Dallas has given to us, and it is important to my firm that we give back to a community that has given us so much.
HPI Real Estate Services and Investments is extremely excited to be a 2020 partner and corporate sponsor with ACT.
I'm Olivia Aidendorf, a partner at Kirkland & Ellis here in Dallas. Kirkland & Ellis is proud to support ACT to improve our city and to serve communities who have been so often overlooked by our justice system. We support you, ACT, and we pray that the impact you have on communities in need would multiply into blessings for our whole city.
On behalf of Walker Duffner, I would like to say that we are excited to be a 2020 event sponsor for ACT. One of the things that we love about ACT is that it allows us to tie our passion for justice, our skills as lawyers, not just to an organization or to an area, but to an individual, so that we can engage that person and make a difference in that individual person that ACT is serving's life.
Hi, I'm Spencer Falls. I'm president of Enmark Services, Inc. We're an energy company situated in Dallas, Texas. And we're proud to be a stakeholder in ACT's mission to work with ACT to restore justice in the neighborhoods throughout the city.
I'm Steve White with American National Bank of Texas, and we're excited to partner with ACT as a 2020 event sponsor. And the reason ACT is important to us is because they make a significant difference in our communities in Dallas. When you think about organizations that want to impact the world, there are those with great intentions and big ideas, but ACT is an organization that takes action. They are literally going into communities and removing the danger and fear and bringing communities together in the name of Jesus Christ. And so with that in mind, that really spoke to us and to our company, and we're so grateful for that partnership.
As Guy mentioned, we would not be able to live out our mission without all of the many partners that support us in various capacities. If you are interested in partnering with us, we have 2 upcoming opportunities for you. First, between now and next Thursday, we are a part of Community Foundation of Texas initiative, North Texas Giving Day. It's the largest community-wide giving event in North Texas, and we would love for you to help us reach our goal of $125,000 to help us continue to support our casework. Second, if you are interested in learning more about our casework, Emily Eber and I would love to connect. All you have to do is email info@actforjustice.org, or you can follow us on social at act_justice. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and I hope you guys have a great night.